Hello there, welcome to an AEW Dynamite review for September 28th, 2022, or the episode that I'm going to call It's Open Mic Night, I guess. And I'll explain more about that as I get into the review of this episode. I'm not going to spend too much time preambling this thing. I'm just going to say that this was a bit of a mixed bag for me, and also I would say a bizarre episode. And the reason I say it was a bizarre episode was that I can't say it was bad, because it wasn't. But the reason I call it It's Open Mic Night, I guess, is because it felt like everybody, their brother and their sister, all got a chance to speak on the microphone, and I'm not sure if it was necessarily the benefit of the product or the show itself. But again, I can't say it was a bad show because the wrestling that we did get was pretty good. There were moments where it felt like something was at least advancing forward a little bit. Really, all I was seeking from the show was a little bit of consistency and a little bit of advancement in a couple of these different things. I am going to do another episode this week, separate from the Dynamite review, where I'm going to talk a little bit about the current state of AEW, kind of where I'm sitting on it with where we are at the moment. Kind of follow up on the Malachi Black thing, the Buddy Matthews thing, and a couple of other things related to that. But let me focus on the Dynamite episode for tonight and focus on that, and then we'll do that in a future episode coming up here. But for tonight, we started off the show with a very WWE-esque segment, and there was a bit of a taste of this throughout the show. That's why I say it was a bit of a weird thing for AEW to do, and I don't know if that's Tony Khan trying something else, something new, but I'm not sure if he took the right lessons from the way WWE does this kind of thing and tried to apply it. Again, it was very weird. I'll just put it that way. It was very strange. So I'm going to go through my notes here. I did take some copious notes, although I didn't take notes on the individual matches because match quality-wise is usually pretty consistent with AEW. I can't complain about that. But I will say that as far as the show itself is concerned, it was a bit of a mixed bag and it kind of went in waves. So start off with Jericho Appreciation Society coming out to celebrate Chris Jericho's 8th title victory in terms of world championships because he is now the ROH world champion. And he's going to be in the main event as well as part of this. So it's kind of bookending the show. Starts off with a Jericho segment at the beginning and then a Jericho match at the end. Towards the end, I was a little bit less troubled with how this ended up. But at the beginning, I wasn't a big fan. I'm going to be honest about this segment, but let me explain. So it ends up with a big, long talking segment. Daniel Garcia teases leaving. Bryan Danielson comes out. And then he's trying to do this thing where he's almost like pulling away Daniel Garcia from Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho's mad at Danielson. There's a little bit of that. It leads to an impromptu match in an awkward imitation of, the way I phrase it, an awkward imitation of the old WWE opening talking segments, because it started with a match, but we've got Daniel Garcia, we've got Chris Jericho, we've got Bryan Danielson, and the end result is Bryan Danielson having a match that we kind of shoehorned in there with Matt Menard, which makes sense in the context of how the segment went, but the segment went, in my opinion, way too long to get to this point. I was entertained that the Jericho Appreciation Society came out in matching outfits, purple outfits. That was kind of funny. The ladies came out in, obviously it was set up so that they would have open shirts so that the guys could gawk at the ladies a little bit. But the thing was, like I said, it was open mic night because multiple people in the Jericho Appreciation Society got to grab a microphone, including Anna Jay, and I was like, oh, please keep working on this, but like, not tonight, not with the way the rest of. Little did I know the rest of the night would go somewhat like this, and then I'm not sure I'm a fan of it. I have concerns, is what I'm trying to get at. But anyway, fine. We got past the first segment. It resulted in a Bryan Danielson Matt Menard match. Matt Menard is a veteran wrestler, and Bryan Danielson is an all-time great caliber wrestler. So it was a good match. But it was a bit compressed, and the card, we've only got 2 live hours of TV if you're AEW. I need to make this clear. We've only got 2 hours of live television. Rampage is generally a pre-taped show, so I can't count that hour. So the result of this is that we're trying to compress a lot into very little. We have a lot of people on the roster. That's why I say I want to do a separate video talking about the Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, and other things related to that, separate from this. But the point is we have 120 minutes, minus commercial breaks. So we don't have that much time. So every minute that we're using is precious. And I don't feel like tonight's Dynamite episode really honored how precious the time that we actually have of live TV is to this product. There were some segments that I thought were solid, some that missed, some that hit, but it was just a weird mix, and this was part of it. So we did a long talking segment, which resulted in this match. It was a bit truncated because of that. I don't know if Matt Menard versus Bryan Danielson is the best use of Danielson, but Bryan Danielson win by submission. Claudio did make out. I did make a point of stating I would have preferred to see kind of Claudio out as a continuation of him losing the ROH title to Chris Jericho, but he did come out during the match when there was interference from the JAS, and he did literally physically carry out Matt Menard's tag team partner away. So 2.0 was separated, so he was literally carried out by Claudio, which was a great power move for him to literally carry him all the way up the ramp and all the way out of one of the tunnels. You know, he was completely taken out of it. Then it led to a Jon Moxley promo video. So fine, it was great to set him up a match against Juice Robinson. So congratulations to the Robinson family, both Juice Robinson and Toni Storm, Juice Robinson's wife, who were both on the show at the same time in kind of title eliminator / title matches. I'll get to more of that later on. But this was a title eliminator, is the point that I'm trying to get across. So this was to set up a title eliminator. And again, the champion is having to face a potential challenger, where if they lose, then the challenger gets to challenge them, which I'm not a big fan of title eliminators where the champion is involved in it. That's just me, but we'll move on. So there was an MJF video package from last week reviewing his promo with Wheeler Yuta, where he kind of outclassed Wheeler Yuta, because Wheeler Yuta is a passionate promo, but he's not as good a promo. He's not as smooth at it as MJF, so which is fine. And then there's a beatdown of Wheeler Yuta. Wheeler Yuta comes out after the video promo, comes down the ramp, and starts cutting a promo again. He defends the honor of Tony Schiavone for the cheap face pop, fine. But it's another talking segment. So just so we're clear, at this stage in the episode, we had a Jericho Appreciation Society, and I didn't even talk about the pizza guy, whose name I already forget, the indie pizza guy who was out there. He was part of the joke in the whole thing. So we've got all this talking segment that leads into one match, and then we do a video promo, and now we've got another promo, talking segment, Wheeler Yuta kind of playing up the fact he's from Philadelphia, and then it leads to MJF coming out for more talking in another promo. MJF is a great promo. He does a great job. He does play up Yuta's lack of mic skills, but he also does give him some praise for them both being wrestlers in the independents and him being a great wrestler in general. So good on MJF, because he's supposed to be an asshole who runs down his opponent, but at the same time, you gotta at least make so this opponent has a reason to exist. You've got to at least give him credit for something. So he gave him credit for his in-ring prowess, which is great, and it plays into the Blackpool Combat Club thing, which is fine. I get it. So from that perspective, it was good. But then Yuta fires back at him, goes up the ramp, and then the Gun Club stops him from being able to advance. MJF finishes off his promo, says he doesn't even want to finish his catchphrase for Philadelphia, lets the Gun Club finish the catchphrase, and Wheeler Yuta ends up standing there staring at him angrily. My comment literally after my next line was, this was a dumb segment, which it was. They did a little bit of a make good later on, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, but I'm just saying this was a dumb segment, and it used up, again, more airtime, precious minutes that could have been used for something else, or at least structure this differently so Wheeler Yuta doesn't look like an idiot initially. He will get his comeuppance by the end of the show, spoiler, but it was still weird. Like, at the end of the day, the Gun Club, we're keeping up with the firm thing where the folks show up when they're needed. You had Morrissey last week and the Gun Club this week, which is fine. At least you established that this faction for hire, so to speak, is doing work for him, so fine. Then you got another promo segment. So it's Jay Lethal versus Darby Allin for a one-on-one match they're going to have. Fine. Now we get to the Jon Moxley and Juice Robinson match. Robinson attacks him before the bell. Jon Moxley ends up winning by armbar. I'm not going to cover the play-by-play. I'm not doing it. It's one of those things where the match was solid, and if you enjoy it, go check it out. I would say it's worthwhile checking out. A good performance by Juice Robinson, all things considered, but the people didn't really know Juice Robinson at all. It was good they gave you a little background leading into it, but if you're in the live crowd and you don't know Juice Robinson previously, you might not understand there's a little bit of history between him and Jon Moxley, and it's not just some random guy from Bullet Club facing off against him. So it was good, but the match ended up finishing. Jon Moxley wins, retains, he continues his championship run, his third championship run. Congratulations to Jon Moxley on that. Hangman Adam Page's music hits. He comes down to the ring. They do a stare down. MJF mocks them on the microphone, but before he finishes, and this is why I said about comeuppance, Wheeler Yuta is there behind him in the luxury box that he's in and attacks him and has to be restrained by security. So he does get his comeuppance to set up a match. And I'm sorry, I failed to mention this. In the MJF promo, he basically agreed to have a match with Wheeler Yuta next week on Dynamite. Fine, good. We're setting up for next week's episode. But again, the segment itself was a little bit dumb in the way it was structured. Wheeler Yuta did get his comeuppance during the show, so I will kind of wipe away a little bit of my criticism because of that. So it was good that they at least gave Wheeler Yuta something before the show ended. He was already beat up last week, and then this week he was verbally beaten down again. And he looked like an idiot staring at the Gun Club and MJF and not being able to do anything about it. But he was at least able to get MJF in the luxury box and at least get a little bit of a beatdown on him to kind of get a little bit of his own heat back. So it was good from that perspective. Next up is a promo video on Bandito, who's going to be taking on Chris Jericho for the ROH Championship in the main event. And a point that I made here is that it's still a problem to me that the AEW World Title Match Eliminator segment has already happened, and the main event is the ROH title, a federation, a company that doesn't currently exist really, other than Tony Khan's imagination and all these big universe of belts that they're holding on to. So fine. But then we move on to a segment which again follows up with one of the themes that I've talked about the last several weeks. So we do this video promo that is leading up to this women's match. It shows a little bit leading up into this match where Toni Storm is about to defend the title against Serena Deeb. But then we also cover, Saraya's, I think I got it right this time, Saraya's debut, which again was a very good segment, but Saraya is going to talk. She is going to grab the microphone and speak to us. If you've noticed, I've already talked about a lot of talking segments. And again, I'm also including the MJF thing, mocking them on the microphone, because even from the luxury box, he had a microphone and he was talking to them and running them down from the luxury box. This was his second talking segment. So now Saraya comes out. Great, good solid ovation as well, again. But at least she gets to deliver the promo in the ring. So she got an introduction, she got to come down to the ring, and she got to talk a little bit. She promises to be a change in the division because she is the Revolution. So now she's got a little moniker tagline. Now, it's from here where everything kind of falls apart. I don't mind conceptually what they're doing with this. Fine. Saraya can actually talk a little bit on the microphone, which is good, and it'll be good from that perspective. I'm glad they gave her some time to talk. But then after that, everything that went from after this became increasingly bizarre. She called out the women's division. She basically said that, she basically asked the women's division to come out. But the problem is you weren't going to get the women's division. You were going to get whoever happened to be there at Dynamite that week. So the first group that came out was Toni Storm, the AEW interim, we have to include the qualifier, interim women's champion, Sky Blue, Willow Nightingale, I want to say, Athena, and Madison Rayne. Okay, not exactly a murderer's row for the most part other than the women's champion. I love Athena. I appreciate Madison Rayne. Willow Nightingale, from everything I've seen, is quite good. Sky Blue is a great prospect, but I'm like, okay, this isn't looking too good. So they come out, and Saraya is trying to celebrate them and saying that Toni Storm is the best champion AEW has seen. And literally my next note was, thanks from Thunder Rosa, Hikaru Shida, and a great setup for Britt Baker to come out. Even before they even continue, you know where this is going. So some boos from the crowd with that statement, because obviously Thunder Rosa was a very popular champion. I haven't even mentioned yet Hikaru Shida, the longest reigning AEW Women's Champion, who didn't really get a full, a fair shake as far as being champion because of the pandemic and the fact she had to carry that division for over a year when there wasn't really a division to have. But okay, fine. I guess I get it from Saraya's perspective in this segment, but it comes off looking kind of silly. It's like, you just got here 5 seconds ago and you're already declaring who the best champion AEW scene is. Fine. So Britt Baker, of course, comes out to respond to this, logically. But again, remember what I just said. A moment ago, we brought out Toni Storm, Sky Blue, Willow Nightingale, Athena, and Madison Rayne. Madison Rayne, who just showed up, who is now a trainer in the back and doing some work with the women's division. Great. Willow Nightingale, who's a great prospect. Sky Blue, great prospect. And Toni Storm, the AEW interim women's champion. Fine. But then Britt Baker comes out with Rebel, Jamie Hayter, and Penelope Ford, kind of offering an alternative heel faction to this. So Baker is doing her own promo. Remember, how many promo segments have we already done already? And this is interrupting Saraya's promo segment. So Britt Baker comes out with her microphone and says, another night, shiny new toy. The crowd still wants to chat for Jamie Hayter is a note I made on this one. And the next note I make here is, this segment is already too long and comes off as bizarre because you're missing a chunk of the women's division. I already mentioned Hikaru Shida. By the way, I didn't even mention Jade Cargill. It's better in this case that she's not there because of what's about to happen here. But the point is, you're talking about the AEW women's division. Jade Cargill is literally a champion in the women's division. Hikaru Shida was the longest reigning AEW women's champion. And we're not even counting Riho, Nyla Rose, again, former champions in this division. Thunder Rosa is away with injury. I get that. Chris Statlander is away with injury. I get that. But it ends up looking like, like a half-assed version of the quote-unquote AEW women's division. You're trying to talk about this Revolution thing. And really what it comes down to is a faction that includes Saraya and Toni Storm and Athena versus Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker and basically the heel team. And then, of course, you're going to have Serena Deeb in a second because the match that was announced for the night was going to be Toni Storm and Serena Deeb. And I'm about to get to that. So Serena Deeb finally comes out. And the actual match is about to happen after a long talking segment. But before we even continue, Saraya already declares that she has a boss that, quote unquote, listens to her and like, hey, take that, Vince McMahon. And the match will be a lumberjack match. Because, of course, because you've already got all these people out there, you may as well have a lumberjack match. It was a very sloppy way of basically, Saraya got to play pseudo GM, which was funny. But at the same time, she got to play pseudo GM after this really clunky segment that led to this lumberjack match. And they made emphasis. I think Taz tried to call it a lumberjill match. It's like, no, we're going to call it a lumberjack match. Fine, whatever. Who cares? It's a lumberjack match for the AEW Interim Women's Championship. And I was just like, this was a very clunky way to end up at this point. And I was just like, there's probably 100 better ways you could have gotten to this point. My next line here was, the concept is fine, but the drawn out nature feels like a half-assed attempt at the segment and makes it into a ridiculous mess, which is honestly how I felt about it. So the end result was a match. Toni Storm versus Serena Deeb for the AEW Interim Women's Championship in a lumberjack match. So overall, this happened. It wasn't a terrible match. It was a decent match. It had some interesting moments. It had some weird moments. But yeah, apparently Sky Blue is a top 10 woman in the company by default because she was there. So good for her. Jamie Hayter at one point grabbed the legs of Toni Storm and then took out Sky Blue, who tried to interfere, and then exchanged punches with Willow Nightingale before running away from Willow Nightingale and running up the ramp, so that took the two of them out of the segment. Toni Storm wins in a decent match. It was just a weird overall segment. By the way, that's the only women's involvement in the entire show. Again, we don't see anything from Jade Cargill, who is presumably part of this division, quote unquote. It was just weird. It was this whole thing where like Saraya is stating that she's representing this change in AEW, but at the same time, outside of the fact it was a really weird match type, and we ended up there in a weird way and developed almost kind of this mini faction warfare thing where Saraya is representing one side and then another side with Britt Baker and so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, but it was still like one really drawn out segment where like, yeah, the women are going to get this weird pocket. We did this now. All right, we're done. We're never going to see them again for the rest of the show. Fine. I guess we're done with that. It immediately shifts to a backstage interview pre-tape with the Acclaimed. And then Keith Lee comes out and kind of says, he wanted to congratulate them, but he saw that Billy Gunn interfered in the match, and he said they were carried, and that's supposed to lead to potentially a match down the road, so be it. But then we do another backstage pre-tape with Andrade, Private Party, Butcher, and Blade kind of arguing with each other, and it leads to Matt Hardy kind of coming by and implying that Private Party should get out of the contracts and join Matt Hardy, and they'll do it right this time. So that's another pre-tape. And then Ricky Stark comes out with a match with a rando. I wrote it down as a rando, but I think it was Eli Isom, I want to say, question mark. Great reaction for Ricky Starks. It was a squash match. Okay? This is what happens when, by the way, you do so many talking segments. You end up having, and backstage promos and pre-tapes, is you end up having to do a squash match for Ricky Starks just to get him on the damn show. Then we do a promo for Christian and Jungle Boy. Great. Then we finally get to the main event. Chris Jericho versus Bandito for the ROH World Championship. It was a decent match. There was a dumb sequence. So actually, there's a couple of different things I want to quickly talk about this match, but I'm going to go in order here. There was a dumb sequence in this match. Like I said, it was a decent match overall. Like, I'm not complaining about the match, but it was a decent match. But there was this dumb sequence where Chris Jericho was thrown against the ropes, went over the top rope, accidentally tripped, and then that slowed him down, but then climbed the top rope, and Bandito's literally in the middle of the ring staring at him, kind of setting up and kind of lining himself up. And then Chris Jericho tries to jump from the top rope, like doing almost like a double axe handle, and then he gets kicked in the stomach. And my next line is literally, huh? I was just like, what is going on? Another sequence of the match was the longest delayed vertical suplex of all time, that at a certain point I was like, oh, for God's sake, just finish the move. I will give credit. I want to give credit. Bandito did an excellent job considering he was a relative unknown for a lot of this crowd. He was able to get Philadelphia to kind of root for him towards by the end of the match. So they were actually able to build up the match so that Bandito was getting some good reaction from the crowd. He was doing some excellent moves. It ends up being where Chris Jericho pulls down his mask a little bit, ends up winning with the Lion Tamer because Bandito has his mask over his face and can't see where the rope is, so couldn't escape from it. And then Chris Jericho finishes by, doing another interview. By the way, another mini microphone segment to finish the show. Chris Jericho challenges Bryan Danielson for October 12th in Canada. Hey, congratulations to me. I've got tickets to that, so that should be fun. But the point is, now at least that plays into a bit of a storyline where Chris Jericho seems to want to destroy Ring of Honor and its history and its former champions. And it's like, okay, I can at least get into this a little bit. Chris Jericho creates himself as the antagonist against ROH. But unless ROH is going to get a show, I'm expecting they're going to get their comeuppance. But unless it leads to a show, this could be a bit of a miss. But at least it's a purpose for Chris Jericho having this title outside of the fact he just wanted another title. So fine, I get that idea. He wants to destroy ROH from the inside as champion and basically destroy everything they stand for. And he ended up beating up the ring announcer. So fine, great. From that perspective, I suppose it was fine. As a main event segment, I don't know if I felt it that way, but like the match was okay for what it was. And it was one of the few matches we actually had on the show. Like I said, we had a Ricky Stark squash, but the rest of it was just kind of The women's lumberjack match was fine for what it was, but it just took so long to get to the damn point. And that was kind of the theme of the show. There were a lot of like concepts and ideas. a little bit of follow-up from previous weeks. I did appreciate that Saraya got a chance to speak a little bit, but at the same time, it resulted in this long drawn-out segment, and we still had the same issue. We had one women's segment. We just made it really long. It started off with a long talking segment, followed by a match that was weird, that we just basically shoehorned as many people into the show as possible and just made it roll with it. Because just to be clear, you think about the names that I read off to you when we talked about that segment. Well, we had Anna Jay and Tay Mello earlier on in the show with the Jericho Appreciation Society. Obviously, they weren't part of this segment because that wouldn't have made any sense, really. But they're part of the women's division, technically. There are other people in the women's division who could have ended up on this segment. Again, Nyla Rose, former champion, nowhere to be seen on this segment. Jade Cargill, current TBS Women's Champion, nowhere to be seen on this segment. And probably for the best, because they would have been just lumped into this lumberjack match. But it was just weird. The whole thing, I'm glad there was some follow-up to Saraya showing up. But at the same time, I don't feel like I'm any closer to pinpointing exactly what it is Saraya is or what she's going to do. But apparently Tony Khan listens to her so she can book matches? Question mark? I don't understand what it is we're doing here. So I'm confused. I'm perplexed. I suppose we've had some advancement in certain ways, but in other ways, I am about as confused as I was before. I was enjoying some Johnny Walker Black during watching this show, and I was wondering if Tony Khan finished my bottle, because there were certain things that left me kind of that level of confused. This week, I'm not going to give it a rating like last week. I'm going to give it an incomplete. It's kind of a not applicable and incomplete, something like that, because I don't know how to rate it. I guess what it really is going to come down to is what happens next. Because this week was just a bizarre holding pattern from the previous week. There was some carryover, and it feels like we're starting to develop some kind of a storyline. Like I said, the Chris Jericho thing, if his goal is to destroy ROH as champion and desecrate them forever or something, for whatever reason Chris Jericho's doing that, at least that is a storyline. Saraya wanting to be the revolution, quote unquote, I suppose that is a storyline. But I think it's only really going to hold water if it leads to them having segments going forward. You need multiple women's segments. You could have literally done this exact same thing and broke it into two pieces, one in the first hour and one in the second hour, and I would have felt better about it. If you had done the talking segment that leads to you declaring there's going to be a lumberjack match, you could have then done that in the second hour, and I would have felt better about it. But shoehorning everything like that in between, by the way, I understood why you did it, but shoehorning everything in between into like this long drawn out segment just meant we were all kind of sitting there watching people talk for a really long time on a show where we spend a lot of time watching people just talk. It's a bit of a mixed bag in the sense that AEW has never been able to seemingly find its balance between having these really long matches, which they tend to like to do, and then when you do a talking segment like this, you either make it extremely short to the point it's almost ineffective, or you just start dragging it out, and then we wonder. Even at one point during the segment, the talking segment, Saraya literally said, "Oh, you're not going to count me down. Let's take even more airtime." I'm paraphrasing, but she said, "Take more airtime. Let's bring down the women's division." Where again, you only brought up like 9 women, and technically, Rebel is not a in-ring competitor. She's basically a manager. And I've already mentioned a bunch of names, but Diamante is like sort of on the roster semi-permanently, so she wasn't out there. Where's Julia Hart? You know, licking the wounds of the House of Black, I suppose. And again, I'll talk more about the House of Black, Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, and a lot of the things related to AEW and his current situation in a different video, separate. But yeah, this was a bit of a mixed bag. I'm going to call it incomplete because I want to see what next week looks like in order to probably judge this. Similar to how the Wheeler Yuta segment at the beginning of the show was not great, in my opinion. It was partially salvaged by the beatdown afterwards. They were able to at least resolve that a little bit within the show and set up the next match for next week a little bit better. So that was good. So I'm going to give it an incomplete, and I will judge it more based on what next week looks like. I'm not even going to count Rampage because realistically, I don't think any storyline advancement is going to happen during that. But I'm going to look at next week to be a better indicator of how I should feel about this week. Anyway, that's it for me on this one. I'd love to get your thoughts or comments in the comments section. Like I said, we're doing more of these reviews talking about this. Right now, the AEW Dynamite review is kind of the main episode that I'm going to do. I may do a couple of episodes here and there, like the one I'm planning on doing, talking about some of this other stuff separately on its own deal. If you like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stuff related to this, and we'll catch you in the next one.